Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait for the attendees to all arrive. But thank you all for coming. Just give it a few more minutes as we wait for people to get here.
I think I can.
Oh, perfect. There you are.
Nice to see you in person, Kieran.
Yeah, nice to see you too.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Of
I'm
course.
getting slides up here. Having a little bit of an issue with my slides as updated. It was still in a draft, but I finished. I might have to just thumb drive it.
Okay. Well, would you mind if I just start, going over the sort of housekeeping stuff while you prepare that, and then I'll introduce you?
Please, yes, absolutely.
All right, wonderful. So hello, everyone. Welcome to the Public Interest Environmental Law Conference. This is our first panel talk, so it's for the year, so it's very exciting. Thank you so much for coming to our panel on the intersection between poverty and climate change in the light of the horrific Mayfield Candle Factory collapse that occurred this last year. My name is Kieran Gay, and I will be moderating this panel. I have a few announcements, and then we will get started. Firstly, a tech warning. Don't worry if you can't see yourself. This is a Zoom webinar, so all attendees are automatically muted with video off, so you'll only be able to see the panelists. Also, throughout the panel, if you have a question, please use the Q&A function. Our panelist will complete his presentation, and then there will be a Q&A session at the end where we will answer all your questions, but feel free to submit them as we go. During the panel, we will be sending out a link through the Q&A function containing instructions on the following topics. Firstly, for the legal professionals in the audience, there will be instructions on how to obtain CLE credit for your attendance. And secondly, how to donate to our alumni board, Friends of Land, Air, Water, which provides stipends for students doing unpaid public interest environmental law internships over the summer. Lastly, University of Oregon is located on Kalapuya Ilihi, the traditional indigenous homeland for the Kalapuya people. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. Today, descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, Community of Oregon, and the Confederated Tribes of Siletz, Indians of Oregon, and continue to make important contributions in their communities at UO and across the land we now refer to as Oregon. Polk would like to acknowledge the traditional homelands of the Kalapuya peoples in the Willamette Valley and express our respect for the indigenous nations in Oregon and our support for their sovereignty. I will now introduce our guest. Amos Jones teaches, writes, and advocates in the areas of contracts, civil rights, religious freedom, and ethics. His work focuses on contemporary conflicts resulting from competing liberties enshrined in the U.S. Constitution. Other matters on which Professor Jones consults involve institutions and companies accused by particular groups of illegally discriminating based on age, gender, national origin, race, and/or religion. In addition to his work in litigation, Professor Jones currently serves as an adjunct professor of First Amendment law at Trinity Washington University and as the co-convener of Washington, D.C.'s chapter of the National Conference of Black Lawyers. Today, Professor Jones joins us to talk about the intersection of poverty, civil rights, and climate change as plaintiff's attorney on the ongoing Mayfield Candle Factory lawsuit. His experience gives him a unique perspective on this issue. I will now turn it over to him. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kieran. And I am so pleased with the invitation. I want the audience to know that Kieran has been very diligent in their understanding of these issues and in their patience with this presenter. I am so fortunate to be able to work with someone such as Kieran and this group of people who for all these years at this particular law school, Oregon, have made it their business to advance the cause of climate change, of environmental law and policy, and especially now as I'm charged with addressing the issues of climate change and as it relates to civil rights and workers' rights in particular, and employee rights. I am a plaintiff's employment attorney. About 90% of my practice is in that space, largely discrimination, but increasingly we're seeing these extreme weather events that are bringing new issues and new avenues of advocacy and hopefully collaboration from the plaintiffs and the defense bars to do preventive measures so that people's civil rights and employee rights are not violated, while also preserving the need to have business and commerce to flow in the ways in which we would expect in a civilized money economy environment such as the United States. I'm going to share my screen off and on here such that you can at least appreciate a bit of my feeble efforts at slides. But I do think visual is helpful. I don't have a lot of pictures and graphs like I usually do. And it says I'm screen sharing. Hopefully you're just seeing the PowerPoint slide because there's a lot of junk on my desktop. Kieran, can you let me know whether you're seeing just the PowerPoint slide or whether it's everything? Okay.
Yeah,
so,
we can see the PowerPoint. We're not seeing just the slide, we're seeing the whole PowerPoint, rather than presentation view, we're seeing the whole PowerPoint.
That's fine, but none of my desktop, correct?
Correct, just the
Very
PowerPoint
good.
program.
Okay, that's good. I don't mind you're seeing the index. So I'm here to talk about a very specific event that was big in the news in December, and what that means for those of us who are practicing and studying issues of environmental law, climate change, and in people's rights. I want to give some background about the demographic, if you will, milieu into which these problems might arise. And what problems are these? Problems of massive calamities that insurance companies would call acts of God that nevertheless might be predictable. You know, I'll lay it on the table. I'm in addition to the board of some of the boards I'm on, I'm the chairman of the board of the Seymour Institute for Black Church and Policy Studies. I have a lot of religious commitments. To me, the sun rising every day is an act of God. But we still plan around it and can plan for it, and it does not absolve us of the need to put on sunblock. So what we deal with in the case of extreme weather events is, yeah, maybe nobody knew an EF4 tornado was going to come barreling through over 3 hours and a couple of 100 miles, largely in southwestern Kentucky. But what we do know is that tornadoes happen, and that's why they're public warning systems. Here's the demographic setup. Consider that some of the literally hottest areas for relocation in our country happen to be the hottest areas for climate and high rising sea levels as well, like Florida. So I just want us to think about, as we go through my case study of this candle factory where employees were there during a Category 4 tornado and got smashed. We want to think about how this might look in other contexts with things like hurricanes, etc. So I say, here come the people and the extreme weather events. We have masses of population heading to regions of the country where there could easily be environmental problems, and not just climate change, but think of the earthquakes. California, Southern California is very important, but there are fault lines in Southern and Northern California, San Francisco, the San Andreas Fault. And so we have to be aware of what the people under our care in the employment context when we set out to grow our businesses. The backdrop of this is not anything, the concern about these potentialities is not something that's lost on government. We have a regulatory purview in many agencies that will protect, if you will, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the proclivities of the president in power. But we have a Department of Labor, and there are regulations that I could cite on down the line that are out that help us understand how to care for our workers in the event of natural disasters, especially if you're in a factory. Here, the employees made about $8 an hour base pay, but there was a lot of overtime. And so the news reports had indicated, oh, $8 an hour, but there's most people were on a lot of overtime. Many people also had worked at this factory many, many times. So I'll get into the specifics of this factory event in a moment. But first, I want to continue laying the background, approaching this, since this is a CLE, as a practitioner who will be called to spot these issues when they materialize the next time or the next and the next. So in the back of your mind should be, there are people, there's weather, there are weather changes going on. And then also there are governmental agencies, state and federal, that are concerned about worker safety, recourse, and also monitoring. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, makes sure that state agency equivalents of OSHA are inspecting sites for having sirens when tornadoes come, or having an evacuation plan and having drilled people on how to evacuate or where to shelter in place, how to handle toxic chemicals in the event of some kind of disaster. The Environmental Protection Agency has on-point regulations. FEMA, even the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, some of their protections can be understood as having a particular effect in the event of circumstances around weather and fairness in terms of, if you have all of your employees, like one case I have against one set of cases against Pepco, which is the power company here, we're in storm duty. And this was a class action that we attempted to have certified in the DC federal court. Now I represent folks in front of the DC Office of Human Rights against Pepco, the power company. But the allegation on these 8 Black men has been that when you have storm duty, that's emergency duty, for the Pepco employees and engineers and things, it's supposed to be all hands on deck to go and to restore the power lines, which is highly dangerous work, substation work. But they say at Pepco, it's all Blacks on deck, not all hands on deck. And that's a very important part of our federal lawsuit. On one hand, that's pending for half the people at the DDC federal court. And on the other hand, at the DC Office of Human Rights, those cases have been going on for 4 years. And I have 8 clients who have made this allegation. So in storm duty, you have to look at the EEOC to determine, why is this all Blacks on duty? Is this a plantation still? So that should be in the back of people's mind too. I will say at the candle factory, I did not see any racial issues at all, and I'm a Black civil rights attorney. It's a really isolated issue of care, negligence, and of other issues in the case. So be aware of those. Now, I want you to know about this Western Kentucky tornado. And again, I could have spent time pasting this material in, but Wikipedia had the best pictures. And I'm going to share those with you in another screen share so that you can get a sense of the destruction and also what happened on that night, that Friday night in December, in the lead up to the employee and civil rights calamity, workers' rights calamity, in which we found ourselves in Kentucky. I happen to be a native of Kentucky. I'm from Lexington, and for 14 years, we lived in Western Kentucky in the city of Owensboro, where my father had gone to pastor a church, a Baptist church, and where the family moved for my father to take the pulpit of the 4th Street Baptist Church of Owensboro, Kentucky. And we had tornado drills in school, and we had a public warning system that was tested every Friday. And I think that goes on to this day. So I'm accustomed to being in Tornado Alley, as we call it. But not everybody out in Oregon or across the country who's participating in this conference is aware that tornadoes are somewhat predicted. So they don't always touch down. I was never in one in those 14 years in Western Kentucky. My mother grew up in the Jackson Purchase region in Paducah, about probably 40 miles from Mayfield, which was considered the city epicenter of the damage of this one, as you're about to see. And my mother never encountered a tornado growing up in Paducah in the 50s that she was actually in, but they do come. So much so that we drill in school on how to take cover. We also had earthquake drills because the New Madrid Fault is over there too. So similar actions taken, and so it's in your mind that these could be coming, and you often you're out and you might take shelter, but nothing happens. So you have to take it seriously when the weather predicts. Now with the radar, there's a lot of accuracy, and the tornado can actually be tracked if it stays on the ground and travels as this big EF4 one did. As I share my screen once more, we see now here the image is of what happened. First of all, a sense here of the scope. Look at that across all of those states: Arkansas, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky, even Southern Ohio. That's 5 states. And Mayfield there is right in the middle. And this graph tracks the time at which the tornado ravaged these lands. Another useful image is this map of, or this video, this aerial of the town of Mayfield and some of the destruction. Mayfield looked like a Mayfield, a kind of a fair place, a very attractive buildings in the city center, some beautiful churches. They looked like little cathedrals. And it turned out that Mayfield was known for that, and a lot of destruction there. I will say that to me, it's almost like a tornado's like the Tasmanian devil from those films. And you just don't know. That the employees told me it was about 15 seconds. They heard this whoosh, the doors flew open, and then 15 seconds, everything was turned upside down and people were trapped in rubble. And what happened on December 10th, as you can see here, a violent tornado moved across all those states, and then finally dissipated in Ohio, southeastern Ohio, and created a lot of damage. And in Mayfield, at this particular factory, which was employs about 500, some of them through temp agencies, but in a town of 10,000, it's a major employer. And there were about 110 people on duty that night at 9:30 who had come into work mostly around the 4 o'clock hour to work their holiday shift. Many of them wanted to make it to Saturday to qualify for overtime and incentive pay, because that's the way it worked. When you make $8 an hour and it's Christmas time in Mayfield, Kentucky, it's good to have more money. And so people dutifully went there to the candle factory. And when they called us, they called me after some disputes took place after the tornado over whether or not they were allowed to leave. One of them called me, who had been maligned over his accounts to the media about what the workplace was like. And they told me, it's interesting, these employees told me when you ask their job title, they would say, I put the candle in the box, or I made sure the wax was smooth. So there were many lines. It was really an assembly line operation. There was a homegrown company from the 90s that was grown, I believe, out of a woman's garage that's become very successful, and they've kept it homegrown. Again, there's a balance between the needs and prerogatives of business, but also the rights of workers. And those don't have to always be in tension. Accidents happen, tornadoes will come through, perhaps more and more in the future, given the weather patterns and climate change. That's, again, as sure as the sun rises, if we don't change things dramatically, we'll see more of this. My hope here is, I'm not here to assign blame or to advocate. I do that in our class action lawsuit that we filed 4 days after this for the 110 employees. I'm here to be constructive, to put on our minds the issues that are in play in the lived experiences of these types of employees in Kentucky, considered to be low skill, though some of them had other skills. They just decided to work at this particular place in these conditions. So you've seen the meteorological synopsis here and how this particular tornado came. It was enough to where there had been warnings around 6 o'clock hour that evening, and then on up again around right before the tornado came through. In the Mayfield Consumer Products Candle Factory that I'm concerned with, employees were asking, some of them, whether they could leave. And the ones in our case all indicated they were told by multiple named supervisors, you'll be fired if you do leave. And so everybody stayed except a handful of people who defied and went out. And 8 people died, and a 9th person died later. And many people were stuck in the rubble for hours. But it was a heroic effort on the part of the first responders and the co-employees. I will say that the folks were led into shelter. They were sheltered in the factory when this event came. They had been called due to the warnings, the public warning system at least. And so they were sheltered in an interior area. There are problems with the quality and the fitness of the sheltering locations to actually serve as shelters. But in fact, supervisors did have the folks isolated, and then the tornado wished through. It was devastating and traumatic for all involved. Again, many people lost their lives. Several people were in the hospital, and people have permanent damage. That we're dealing with some permanent nerve damage, disabilities, and things like that. There were even, I think, 8 inmates from the Graves County Jail who were on a work release program. Their supervisor got killed in this from the jail. None of the inmates perished, but there were casualties. This was a mass casualty event. And so why was there a lawsuit so fast? Well, it's a lawsuit that I wish had not needed to have been brought. And I hope you can see my PowerPoints again. Can tech support confirm that I'm sharing the PowerPoints once more? The PowerPoint presentation, is that what's...
You're still on Wikipedia.
Okay, I think I know what to do. I'll just stop the share and start it again. Voila, thank you. Now I know to do it that.
Perfect.
And so when there are people at work in a horrific weather calamity or other environmental shock, again, an earthquake, tsunami, you name it, or even just an awful rainfall. You know, rain can sometimes fall and you have roofs caving in. For the employment attorney on the defense side or the plaintiff side, we start to think about the obligations. We don't think first about allocation when someone's harmed. That can be workers' comp, but it can also be tort, depending on the statutory scheme and the case law. But what's always overarching and supervening here are duties of care. Are people trained? Are supervisors trained and advised? Is there a warning system in place? Is there a evacuation route? Have people been drilled sufficiently? Is it enough to have one drill per year when you have a workplace that has constant turnover? So you know that some people have not been trained, and you put them on the line, on the assembly line, but they don't know where to go or what's going on. What are government's expectations? It is the case that the Kentucky Division of Workplace Safety had, which is the state agency that implements OSHA and monitors for OSHA compliance, that they had cited this factory for safety issues in the past. One of them considered to be, at least one of them considered to be serious. So the law protects people, protects employees from all kinds of things, including cooperating in a safety investigation. There's an anti-retaliation provision of the OSHA law. You have to think also about countervailing public policy concern. You know, some people have said, well, if they had a union here, perhaps the conditions would have been better, the pay would have been better, the union would have made sure that there was more in place. I haven't told you what was in place and what wasn't. You can pull the lawsuit to get into that. Again, I'm not here to advocate against Mayfield Consumer Products. I do that in court and in press interviews, but I'm here to talk about, to try to isolate the issues in a more objective way. It's a right to work state. in Kentucky. So it's hard to get a union. People should understand that in the South, unions have often been anathema. And I should just say, in fairness to the conservative position on unions, the conservative philosophy, I think, has a pragmatic problem with people who sue the person paying for their health care and or giving them thousands of dollars a year, tens of thousands of dollars a year. Now, these folks didn't have health care benefits, but to go after, to bite the hand that feeds you is wrong. And we know this because when white mill workers in the South started organizing when the labor laws were passed that were pro-union in the 30s, with the support of powerful, morally influential institutions, including the Methodist Church, the United Methodist Church, the Methodist Episcopal Church South, supporting the rights of mill workers to collectively bargain. It became a violent showdown in those mill towns where the workers thought they were going to get their rights and collectively bargain. Some people were shot and killed. And you can read the book Mill Hands and Preachers about some of the ways in which Southerners, white on white crime, if you will, they put out of the dormitories where some of the workers lived in these company towns. The owners own the bank. They basically own the church. They own the dormitories where the people lived with their families, and they would set you out. And so there's a tradition in the South of not going against your employer. And that's one of the reasons you have this right to work motif going. But that doesn't mean that OSHA and FEMA and the EPA and the EEOC are not still having regulatory powers and enforcement authorities, to say nothing of the private plaintiff's bar. So it's very important to look at, again, in the context of the Sun Belt growth, the right to work motif, the extreme weather events frequencies increasing, and to determine what we need in our statutes from the legislature, but also in our private agreements, in the employment handbook, in company policies, in the way that we erect shelters in our workplace, in which we drill our staff on them, trainings across the board, warnings, and even company shutdowns. Some places of business decided that, if there are public sirens going off and people are looking at the radar and telling their friends who work at the candle factory, in 15 minutes, it looks like the tornado is going to go straight through your factory, I would think that you would shut down the factory. And though not outrunning a tornado, they'd say, don't try to outrun a tornado. It can whirl around and, like I said, the Tasmanian devil. But at least dismiss people, if only for liability reasons. One of our plaintiffs declared that he was asking about leaving about an hour before this came, and then the sirens came. And he said, I worked in another state before I moved here and started working here last month. If this were there, we would be dismissed from work right away simply to avoid company liability. Whereupon the supervisor who told them they couldn't leave laughed and said, welcome to Kentucky. And then within 10 minutes, in came the tornado. Boom, they were all smashed and turned upside down and 8 people died. The jury will decide, is there an excuse for this? So I want to show a clip. I raised the question and did not answer it. And the question was, why was there a lawsuit when the tornado hit Friday night at 9:30? How could there be a lawsuit on Wednesday night? What happened? Especially when I am not generally, I'm generally a racism discrimination attorney and sexism, gender, the Title VII stuff. Okay, so you're going to see from an objective source how it came to be. And I'm going to share with you a video clip that not only reports on the storm and the aftermath at the tornado factory in Mayfield, but that also shows us the employee conduct toward these low-income, low-wage workers, employees, and how that milieu produced a class action suit within days. And for that, I go to this report from formerly WGN, but now the News Nation outfit that is a national news network that has covered this story from the inception of it in the hours after this horrible tornado. Now, I will say that this clip came a few days after the suit was filed, but it still came in the immediate aftermath, and it presents what I believe is a very useful summary for our discussion point when we open this up for questions in about 10 more minutes here. I'm loading the clip. I'm having a little bit of a time making this start. Perhaps, maybe I can send this link to our tech support and you can air this. You'll just click this. I'm going to try to share the in the chat privately with tech support because it's taking my Safari ages to load this. Here comes the link, or to reload it. So I will prevail upon tech support here. Am I buffering? Because it seems that even the Zoom direct messaging is slow. Am I buffering, or is it, are we steady on connection here?
The connection's been pretty consistent.
Okay, there. So now you should have the link. And if you could just take the screen over when you have that page loaded and then click play in the image on this web page at the top. And I think it runs about 5 minutes. Thank you for that. This is the last time I will need you to take over, but I can't wait forever, and neither can our audience. And make sure the volume is. So it appears to be frozen.
In that case, I might just share it with the chat, and then we can have the attendees watch it on their own leisure.
Oh, that's just fine. We'll move on. And there's no way that you can, it's just not playing for you. I'm going to try one more thing because this is a very important part. It's going to enrich the discussion, and I can condense the rest of my slides. I'm going to get this out of YouTube, okay? So you can stop sharing your screen because it's just frozen. It looks like yours won't play this, right? Okay, you can stop sharing. I'm going to present this to you.
All right, so it looks like we've lost Mr. Jones. We'll give him a chance to get back in the meeting, and then we'll pick up again.
Thank you for being patient, everyone. Welcome back.
Ladies and gentlemen, pardon the inadvertent intermission. Like any good lawyer, if my iMac is not working, have a Dell laptop right next to you on hand. So sorry it took so long to get back in, but I've loaded the slides on here. This iMac is just frozen. I don't know what happened, but that's all right. We're going to move right along. And now I can play the video myself. And so stand by here so that I can blow this up for you all and start from the beginning, which again is very valuable for our discussion, particularly with regard to the CLE. Those of you who are practitioners who want to discuss, even critique ways that things are being done or not being done, either with this one or with things going on that you see in out in the public space. So with that, I'll share the screen. We're going to go to this one, share that. We're going to full screen it. Turn up the volume.
Employees go home as the storm hit.
Back.
The survivors claim their facility, killing 8 of their colleagues, are now suing the company. The survivors claim factory management refused to let employees go home as the storm hit. Kelsey Kernstein is right here with us in studio with details on this lawsuit. Kelsey.
Well, Adrian, I was there on the ground reporting in Mayfield, Kentucky. I got a chance to speak with a worker at the candle factory. She says workers are angry, some of them living with nightmares of those that didn't survive.
Numerous workers were told that if they were to leave, then they would be punished.
They were given an ultimatum the night of December 10th. Their safety or their jobs.
We have corroborating witness, real-time evidence of that.
A historic tornado ended up leveling a Mayfield, Kentucky candle factory. In total, 8 workers were killed. Now survivors are demanding accountability, hitting Mayfield Consumer Products with a lawsuit. Employees claim the company showed a flagrant indifference to workers' safety the night of the tornado. Some of those workers still recovering from severe injuries.
Some of them are having to go back for medical treatment. There's permanent nerve damage. There are people with mobility problems.
The company's response? The lawsuit has no merit. Safety experts are also expected to review the company's processes. The attorney representing the workers sharing with News Nation he has all the evidence he needs.
I would advise Mr. Ferguson to consider the resources at his disposal and meet me back on here perhaps one day, because we have the facts, the data, the information, the corroborating witness statements and recording.
And plaintiffs in the lawsuit are seeking compensation, punitive damage, and legal fees. Adrian.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Emotional story there. Well, we're starting Christmas week off on the rain.
So not so much the disaster, but it was the spokesperson immediately going out and refuting the independent accounts of survivors in good standing employees over the first 3 days, that entire weekend, where these folks were approached by reporters and asked what happened. And they told what happened. Some of them said, we tried to leave, we were told we'd be fired. And then suddenly out came a PR machine from Washington, D.C., bashing the employees and saying it's not true, it's baloney. They were not told they couldn't leave, and they're liars, basically. So that's when one of them realized, wait a minute, we got this DC outfit doing this, like who handles this like libel stuff, whatever it is. So they called me up here in DC. I got a phone call from a guy named Elijah Johnson, who found me. I have other cases in Kentucky, including 3 times I went against Kentucky State University. I went against Lexington Theological Seminary, the Lexington Herald Leader, because I'm from Kentucky. I'm from a Kentucky family and all over the state. But the fact is that I was concerned and thought, wait a minute, surely there's people this company is not going to abuse and malign, people who are clearly dealing with the aftermath of a major trauma here. And so when I realized this was just not simply OSHA, and they called about occupational safety concerns and that kind of thing, I realized, wait a minute, I am a federal regulatory type person with these agencies that protect workers in Washington, but it sounds to me like you have a bunch of state issues, and I'm not admitted in Kentucky. So I immediately texted my friend one of my friends here who's from Paducah, who's a big lawyer in town, said, who in Kentucky can serve these folks? Because they need me to tell them where to go. And so we got actually with the gentleman I'd worked some cases with before, 1 or 2 employment cases, and a class action firm in Louisville eventually came on. So we gave the company 24 hours to retract this media smear. And they didn't. They doubled down on it. So we sued them that night when they failed to meet the 5 o'clock deadline that Wednesday for all the causes of action you can imagine, while also understanding that workers' compensation is available. And there are ways to do that we're doing. Today, the First Amendment complaint is being filed where we have 8 named people with the very damning accounts and 5 causes of action, which is what I said we'd have from the very beginning of this before we even filed suit. So it was the offensive media strategy, but I want you to understand the way the ethics rules can encourage a beatdown of poor workers. It turns out, and I was contacted, all good, but in Kentucky, the legal landscape is such that it's one of those states where lawyers do not, all you can do if you're a lawyer in order to inform people of their rights is to mail them something. Like you can send mail. There's no form of any kind of what they call solicitation allowed. Understood, that's the model rules of professional conduct. Incidentally, the District of Columbia is the exact opposite. The DC ethics rules encourage solicitation, including in-person solicitation. There are all kinds of other rules of what's proper. But the fact of the matter is that it's encouraged, because in DC, the rule is that people should know they have rights, and who better to tell them than an attorney, whatever. But the point is that there's that in the background, but also there's a 60-day natural disaster rule where the lawyers who are mailing things have to wait 60 days. So I guess what they thought was, because people were pretty much stuck without lawyers, that nobody would have the wherewithal to get to Washington over OSHA issues and a known person who was in the papers in Kentucky and call them and find them and ask for help. So I think it was just kind of a ram in the bush by happenstance that these people happened to find a decent advocate who knows the rules and who understands when we're out of the federal law that I do and we're in need of a state situation. It all works out very nicely. But the point is that the people almost got destroyed by this onslaught narrative of there's no case here, they're all lying. And a PR executive from Washington can get all over TV and get that story going before any advocate on behalf of the poor victims counters that and pushes back. So that's what precipitated the litigation. The clear violations that kept these people trapped in a death trap, and then that led to a slanderous, scandalous narrative being spun that was not true. So that's the suit, that and the other charges you can imagine, negligence and all kinds of other things in the case. So back to the slides, and again, I'm on the other computer here, the backup. Thank goodness for the backup computer. And we're going to go right back to where I was and finish up so that we have 15 minutes for questions, or 12 minutes. The best thing is that we had a little less time in that video. It ran for 1 minute and 10 seconds and not the 5 minutes that I had recalled. Let me now share the screen one more time so that you can follow these slides, because I do have some more lessons in terms of technique and practice. I've given you the summary where the case is now. Before that, I wanted to do the in good standing workers were attacked. So what I've just described are these principles of civil rights and worker protection in extreme weather events. And here's some guideposts for, as what I call an employee plaintiff's guidance. It's an employee plaintiff's lawyer's guidance, pardon me, on how to respond step by step. Follow the story. Know what's going on. Fortunately, I'm from Kentucky, so when somebody called me, I knew what he was talking about. Elijah Johnson, the lead plaintiff. So follow the story. It was all over the global news as well. Take a stand. You know, one thing I was doing was, it was so horrible that people were there under those conditions that, you know, I post things that outrage me on LinkedIn and things like that. I'm a very public lawyer. I always talk to the media whenever my clients want people to know what's going on. I have no problem talking to the media. It's very good for the public to know, for public safety reasons and public policy reasons and public interest reasons, what's going on. So post things so that people know where you stand on these matters. If you're known to be a workers' advocate and you're a federal lawyer in DC and you're available, people will call on you. I also say know your lane and stay ethical and keep records of everything. I am not a Kentucky attorney. The first thing I did when I realized this is out of OSHA is to call on somebody from Kentucky up here who could tell me who might be available and with permission from the new client. Yes, there is OSHA stuff. In fact, we filed a retaliation complaint with OSHA federally. That's what I did. But in the meantime, there are these state issues to fan you out to. So there's also the issue of these inmates. Talk about low-wage poor people. These inmates were hardly getting much of their money to keep. There are issues with that. Inmate labor in a for-profit entity. Keep doing your own thinking. The way our lawsuit is fashioned is completely correct under Kentucky law. And we are assured of that by virtue of our expert class action practitioners, one of whom brought a class action, one of the earliest ones in Kentucky 40 years ago, Bill Davis, the lead trial attorney on this. The class action firm knows. Other attorneys think that workers' comp precludes any kind of lawsuit. They're dead wrong. Know your own legal analysis and be prepared to preempt these bad arguments that people will tell you. And forgive me for looking away. I'm looking at the other computer that I was on, hoping it'll pop back, but I should focus on this camera. Also, here it is, be ready to assemble a team. The biggest climate calamities are going to impact on the biggest factories, which means big numbers of people literally in the same boat. Not quite literally in a boat, but in the same situation at the same time. So be ready and then simply execute. Here's the other part before we go to questions. Climate change, civil court. I don't want to end this conversation when we talk about poor people without talking about how courts can be very, very hard to get into and to stay inside of when people are poor. And so I have called for court reform at the district court levels in state and federal courts across the country. You can read it in the forthcoming volume 57 of the Tulsa Law Review, where I have addressed 10 key points of court reform that center on having 3-judge panels in every trial court and having cameras in every courtroom. Because there's a problem of accountability of the decisions being made in court and the way that poor people and their attorneys tend to be treated in civil court. So I won't go into that here. That's another symposium. In fact, that's what I did at Tulsa Law Review Symposium on the Greenwood Massacre. And you can see that if you YouTube Amos Jones, Tulsa Law Review, just those 5 words, and you'll get my 17-minute presentation. The Law Review article is coming out. I already have the print, the electronic print, and the editor-in-chief told me this week that the books will be here any day. So that should post online very soon. But I did want to say something about that, and I won't go into the details of the court reform platform, but if we're talking about poor people, climate change, mass casualty events, and civil rights, you must understand that court is all against you unless you have a particular kind of advocate who knows how to bring the attention into the matter so that everybody knows they're being watched. And these defense attorneys and frankly, some of these judges don't try the shenanigans that have kept poor people out of court for decades and decades. And no one's talking about it because people want you to think that reform is needed at the Supreme Court, which is the most transparent expert court in the country that actually works better than every other court does. The Supreme Court's the least of poor people's worries. They don't get cert anyway. They don't even get an appeal. Poor people's lawyers don't file appeals. they're afraid of antagonizing the judge who dismissed the case or got it wrong, or they don't have the money to keep working on contingency for poor people. So we need court reform at the bottom level. I would not sit here at Oregon's Law Review or the Oregon Law School Symposium for Environmental Law and Poor People and Civil Rights and not make that point crystal clear. And I commend to you the presentation at the Tulsa Law Review on court reform that can be found in YouTube, Amos Jones, Tulsa Law Review. I now open the floor for questions.
All right, we don't have any questions submitted to us yet, but anyone who is curious about any of the topics that Professor Jones brought up during the presentation, feel free to go to the Q&A function and begin submitting those. We have a few minutes left before our panel gets out at 1. So yeah, feel free to drop them into the box. While we're waiting, I was curious about how these issues tend to differ, because you're dealing with a relatively small, maybe a growing company. If you've how that affects the process and whether, you know, because the Amazon factory collapse happened, the warehouse collapse happened in such short temporal distance from this, how that process tends to change things.
Very good question. The way it changes for me as a pragmatic realist is, I wanted people, even as I was talking to the media, to understand that the owners of the company have lost something. They had to do layoffs after this, which we expected. They had another factory nearby, but you know, the owners, these risks are allocated. There's an insurance policy out there. Why do we have to, as they say in the colloquially, dog people out? So if it's a smaller company in a smaller space, one would think that we might collaborate better and perhaps reach some kind of accord that where everybody's better off. But unfortunately, the way civil litigation works is, if you go up to people talking about, you know, an amicable resolution for everybody, on the defense side, they think somehow you're weak. So, you know, we've just had to fight in court from jump because they made clear by not stopping the slander on these victims, some of them in the hospital giving their accounts to reporters, that, you know, we didn't even fool with that because they made their decision clear. They were going to get a DCPR firm to make it look like their in good standing employees were liars. So I hate that. So I'm having to deal with a small homegrown company in Mayfield in my home state as if it's an international behemoth that's trying to kill everyone in a respect. And that's unfortunate. We need to stop this zero-sum garbage that frankly is propagated by the defense bar usually. As a plaintiff's attorney, I don't want to keep bringing these cases across the country. This is not efficient. Let's get our policies, procedures, drills, and things right. Let's stop having climate change. Let's get the climate right so that we don't have this. I think someone had a question. A person appeared, I believe a physical hand was up, and now they're gone. I can't hear you, Kieran. Can you hear me?
I believe I'm not muted anymore, but thank you. Yeah, if anyone had their hand raised, feel free to drop your question in the Q&A. I'm sure Professor Jones would be happy to answer your question. Sometimes people do raise their hands by accident, though it happens.
Yes, but it was a real hand. It wasn't the Zoom hand, which led me, I thought I saw a hand when the person's, and I mean, feel free to critique and challenge me. I'm a professor. I don't have all the answers. I was going to say, I'm a professor, I can handle it, but no, I'm a professor. I don't have all the answers at all. And some of you may have more experience in this area than I do. So let's enrich each other and share. I'm very open-minded and grateful. 1 + 1 can be so much greater than 2. So let us put our heads together here at this environmental event.
Give it a few more seconds, although, oh, sorry, you were about to say
Kieran,
something.
let me just say something. Behind Kieran, you can see the design for this conference. And I'm a person who's often skeptical of artwork and especially things that are abstract, but I love what you've done with A Different Normal in communicating the uncertainty, but yet some of the themes of what we're in. with the water and the person and the mask and the almost fiery motif with this lettering. And I think that's a brilliant conference symbol. So I commend you all for the artist. I commend those of you who chose that. It really gets to the fluid nature of this, the fiery nature of this, and the concerns of safety and caution. And this person, he or she is there in the act, they are in the act of taking on or off, or maybe just in suspense. So I think it's a brilliant depiction that certainly reflects some of how it feels when these new legal scenarios confront us in practice.
Well, thank you. Jamie Tucker designed this artwork, so I'm sure she'll be pleased to know that you like it. We do have to make room for our next panel. It's coming up on the same Zoom account. So thank you so much, Professor Jones, for joining us. And thank you everyone who attended this panel, and happy PILC, everyone. I hope you all have a good week. Goodbye.